Well, there you go, folks. It's 7 o'clock. Just gone past, as a matter of fact. And Andrena, Forrest, and myself running the show, Dreaming the New Dream. And tonight's guest is someone who just, what was the best words to say? Spontaneity. Everybody's got a story, and they come through different doors, and then you just take time to listen. And as a result of just listening, there's a great opportunity for myself to introduce our guest to Andrena, and Andrena had a chat, and as I say, the results are history. That's why we've got our guest tonight. So take it away, Andrena.
Yeah. Hi, everybody, and welcome. And if you're listening to Dreaming the New Dream anywhere in the world or listening to the replay, welcome. And today is the 29th of September. We're just heading to the last couple of days of this month. Excuse me. Today I have great pleasure to introduce Phil Linden, which the connection came through Jeff and business. So thank you, Jeffrey, for introducing Phil. So Phil is a senior leader in the Vantage Point Church. He's also a chaplain in the army, and his main focus is helping to improve people's lives on many, many levels. And I'm really looking forward to you, Phil, sharing your story of how you started on this journey, and especially when COVID was on and you served 8,000 meals a week, and I'm sure you've got some really heart stories to share. So welcome, and thank you for being our guest this week.
Hey, thanks so much, Andrena. Thank you, Jeffrey, and good evening from where I am to everyone. Good morning to anyone who's watching on the other side of the world. It is good to be with you. So thank you for the opportunity.
No, thank you. So let's start then. You were raised and born in Melbourne?
No, born in New Zealand. So,
okay.
But I do barrack for the Wallabies. So for all the rugby supporters out there, I figure when in Rome, do as the Romans. So I barrack for the Wallabies. But no, moved here to Australia when I was 7 years old. So most of my life is Melbourne by a long shot. So yeah, predominantly raised in Melbourne. Yep.
So you were brought up in a religious background, shall I say?
Short answer is yes. Dad was a church minister for many years until he retired, and Mum was the church organist, as it was back in the day before things moved to guitars and drums and keyboards and everything else. So grew up in a Judeo-Christian environment, religious environment for sure. Yep.
Okay. So obviously that's your background. So was that sort of inbred into you? So when you started going through life?
Yeah, I think like anything, we all come to an existential crossroads at some point where what we have heard, what we've grown up believing, what we've understood to be truth or otherwise, you have to actually engraft it and kind of work it out in your own self. And so I think that certainly growing up in that, it does inform the view. It does have an impact on our view. I mean, our family of origin always has an impact on our worldview. But there also comes a point in time where you reach your own reckoning. And I would say that was in my early 20s when I was very, very heavily invested in the business world. So my background, actually, Andrena, is my degree is in economics and marketing. My background is a Bachelor of Business. I had, at one point, I think it was 500 staff, a turnover of $40 million, and I was in my early 20s. And it was just one of those moments where I'd start work at 6 o'clock, finish at 10 o'clock, and, you kind of sit there and go, is this really what life's meant to be? Is this the sum of my life, which is chasing money or, having big staff or boasting in what I'm achieving? And I think you kind of come back to some of the roots that you're grounded in and realize there's probably a lot more to it than this pursuit that I was in at the time. So I think in my early 20s, there was that kind of existential moment of what actually does my life do? What is the purpose of my life? How do I want it to run? So yeah, I think we all come to that crossroad at some point for ourselves, even though our upbringing is something. So yeah.
So you're going to have to guide me more than I'm guiding you, I think, with this, because your journey is very different in the fact that what you're doing to help people's lives now. And so I know you've got some real heart stories to share. So so when you were 22 or onwards, how did you give up what you were doing then to working along to what you've come to where you are now to this day in this moment?
I think so I'll do a little quick bit of history and then kind of pull out a couple of key points if that works okay. So I was in that zone. I was married in my mid 20s, and we had children pretty much straight away. And so a bit of my background is we actually now have 6 children. My wife and I, Kirsten and I, have 6 kids. We've got 5 boys and 1 girl, and no, the girl is not the last one. We didn't just keep going until we got it. My wife always said to me when we were engaged, she said, I want you to know that I really believe I'm called to have a large family of 6 kids. And I went, well, I want 2, and here we are with 6 kids. So what could I tell you? This is just where we're at. And people say you must really love kids, and I go, no, I really love my wife. But that aside,
I love it.
That aside, I think it was kind of in my mid 20s where, again, I was in the pursuit of the business world. I had my own business. I was doing those sorts of things, and I think by the time I'd hit 30, there's just you just realise that your life becomes one big pressure cooker of trying to please people, trying to earn enough money, all that sort of stuff. And I had an opportunity come up to actually join a not-for-profit as a in a microfinance arena. And so it was about the age of 30 where, I'd always had a faith and was involved, but I started working in a not-for-profit with poor people or the disadvantaged or the disenfranchised in developing nations such as India and Indonesia and so on. And, there's so many stories that I could share just of that space alone of working in the not-for-profit sector, which I did for a few years. And I just think it reshapes your worldview when you actually see that the world is bigger than what you perceive it to be in your kind of narrow band, where the world has a lot more challenge, a lot more trauma, a lot more resilience than perhaps we often realize it does, because our frame of reference can be very narrowly banded. And so, I did a lot of work for a couple of years in the developing nations. That kind of set me on a new journey, and I guess a new enlightenment about what I believe I was built for. There was one particular occasion, if you're okay for me to share a story, there was one particular occasion where we were doing some microfinance work in Kolkata in India. And, I had the privilege to actually walk through the sex trade district of Sonagachi, which is in Kolkata. And as I was walking through that area with one of the guys that was working there, I met some of these extraordinary women who had been sold into slavery from young. And so we spent time talking with them and working with them and just hearing their stories. Because, you said before, everyone's got a story. And I remember on one occasion, it was about 30 degrees and they were all huddled around a little fire, because in Sonagachi, 30s are probably a little cool. Huddled around a little fire. There was a small group of about 10 or 12 women who would sell themselves. And again, I don't need to go into the details because I'm not sure your audience. But in that space, the situation had certainly hurt, but they were some of the most generous, beautiful, spirited people I think I'd ever met, Andrena. It's quite extraordinary that they had nothing, and their life was slavery since a child and abuse but yet there was some intrinsic beauty of humanity that those moments where we have such a Western mindset that looks at how beauty should be perceived and how we should understand it. And I think it was one of those moments where I really just felt there's something about this, and working alongside people, not from a condescending point of view, but from a how do I learn from you and you learn from me? And that sounds really odd because we think we're coming into that environment to show everything and to teach everything and to fix. But I really learned that our efforts in life and anything that has a spiritual basis to it has to have an element of we learn from each other. This is genuine community. And So I'd seen some of the most horrific things with natural eyes. You know, when you see things naturally, they are horrific. They are undoubtedly, and I wouldn't seek for 1 second to diminish the trauma of some of what had happened to these people, to these beautiful women. But I woke up at 3 o'clock the next morning. And when I say woke up, I was tossing and turning. And I just woke up at 3 o'clock and burst into tears and said, you know, God, whatever you want me to do, you just tell me and I'll do it. Like, there's something got to be more than the business pursuit. There's got to be more than the house and there's just more to life than this. And it was a spiritual moment for me of just saying, whatever you want, you just tell me what you want me to do and I'm ready to go. And so I think it was the allowance of being in that position, of being in the position where I could confront my own views of my own savior mentality, my own whatever words you want to use. You know, here comes the hero to fix the situation. It was the opposite. Mm-hmm. It was, I learned something in that moment. And it's like, all right, what do you want me to do with this? And I really felt the Spirit say, I want you to go to the disempowered, the disenfranchised, and I want you to go to the disabled. Mm-hmm. So it was this kind of, these are the people that I want you to help, because I want them to understand that that's not how God sees them. Society might see you a certain way, but God doesn't.
Yeah.
You know, so it was that kind of 3 o'clock in the morning, you might call it a road to Damascus kind of moment where you just pulled up and you go, oh, what actually do I want my life to count for? What is there, that bigger calling and that bigger purpose that sits beyond the pursuit of so much, and as I say, that sits beyond the understanding, which is a very, very, I don't even know what words to put on it. It's almost like it's a condescending reality where we think we're here to fix you. I tell you, boy, did I learn in the not-for-profit sector, just not how these things work. It's not how God works, and it's not how community works. It's not how humanity works. So
hey,
go on, Jeff.
There was these 3 Christian fellows who went into Indonesia back in the 70s, I think, or the 80s. And I'm starting to ask myself, were you one of these 3 guys? And they used to go through Indonesia, Borneo, and one of the things they used to do is come to a village and ask the village, what is it you require? And of course, they'd all been taught now to go and get the rice and all that stuff from the rice companies, which was all being modified or had got a higher yield and so forth. But these guys turned around and said, well, have you got anyone from the old days who knows how to harvest the rice itself? And let's flush out your rice paddies, and let's put fish back into the rice paddies. In which case, then they said, well, all you really need is $50 US. And as a consequence, they changed the whole dynamics of that particular village or villages, because they now got the fish and they got the rice, their stable diets, without being contaminated by all the fertilizers and everything else that gone into the rice fields. There's others who said, no, look, we need sewing machines. And of course, the sewing machines were the old treadle ones, which didn't need power. So these 3 guys have gone through there and done stuff under the name of micro financing, and then come back 12 months later, whatever, to take their $50 or $100 US, whatever that was given to them, with no interest. And then, as a result of it, the Sri Lankan guy, who was part of the United Nations, he claimed that he was the instigator and all that stuff. And I thought, yeah, but from the United Nations saying this is hello, and I'm thinking these 3 guys did a marvelous job, and they should get the kudos. I'm saying the story because were you one of those 3 guys? Because it sounds like you fit the bill, mate.
So the short answer is no, I'm not that old. But I thank you, Jeff, for thinking I could be. But the founder of the organisation that I used to work for was an Australian guy who did work in Indonesia and actually started microfinance in Indonesia, because the thing I love about microfinance is it's actually an empowerment model that enables you to learn and to recycle money. So like some of the things that we would do are things like, for example, it's sewing machine, or it might be, there was one guy who we did a small loan for for a compressor because he had a tire business where he'd pump up bike tires, and he'd do it by hand all day, truck tires and bike tires, and he'd be doing it. So we said, well, listen, if we loan you the money, you buy yourself a compressor, the increase in your income, you'll be able to pay it back. And then that money that you pay back, we can then loan to someone else. So I do know the story you're referring to, Jeff. It's possible it was the founder of the organization I work for, because that's what he did. And then there was another guy that took it on to the United Nations, and yeah.
So how do you, coming back into Calcutta with the sex trade, how do you go and change the paradigm there? I mean, you can't be St. Teresa there. I mean, what do you do there?
Well, I think the thing that I understood is, and I'm sure your audience would understand this, everything is spiritual. Okay, so in other words, you know, mental and physical and emotional and psychological and all these things all sit under what I would call and term an umbrella of spirituality. And so the first thing we've got to do is consider what actually matters in that zone. So when we were in the sex trade areas of it, one of the things that we found was, if you take people out, okay, so in other words, what we tend to want to do is we want to save people not only from their future, but from their environment. If you take people out of that environment, they had 20 people lined up who'd been sold as young women who'd been sold, ready to come straight back in, okay? So what we said was, no, we actually need to have businesses within that community that demonstrate two things. Number one, they demonstrate to the women, you don't have to be sold, and we can actually create businesses within that community without judgment, by the way. And this is the thing we've always got to remember, is there's no judgment in any of this. Like, it's not about coming in and saying, well, you should stop doing that and you're wrong. And the world is so riddled with judgmentalism at the moment. I mean, spirituality and the things of the spirit should actually free us from that system of judgmentalism. Okay, so it's about going into those spaces, Jeff, to answer your question and saying, how do we create businesses within those spaces that do not take people out of those spaces, but rather leave them within their communities to support one another, to raise their families? And so that's the first thing. The second thing that was really profound is you've got to create a care system whereby if a lady who has to work, because remember, there's 6,000 women would literally line the streets at night, literally, like shoulder to shoulder along, like we've never seen anything like it. 20,000 men a night would come down there. And again, I want to be careful with the content, because it's not voyeurism that I say this with, because, you know, some people can have this poverty voyeurism, so that's not my intention. But I think it's, to give context, you know, it's 25 to 50 cents a trick. You're trying to earn $2 a day, but your daughter's in the background, and you've got your mind that I need to work to eat, but I also want to preserve my daughter. So creating childcare in the middle of those environments, creating environments for people to stay within their communities, not create a void that this gets filled by another trafficking person, but to create the family systems that enabled them to make sure that there wasn't the generational transfer. So it was really about trying to capture and prevent generational transfer, because that would be the desire of most people. I don't want my kids to go through what I've been through. So how do we do that? So it's childcare, it's businesses within that community, it's community support, and it's things like basic education. Right? If you're taken out of school and sold, it's basic education. So there's a few different strategies that have to play, but the key thing is, it's not about trying to get people out. It's about trying to change it from within, and to spiritually say, how do we change this from within? So I hope that answers your question, but I think it really is that, how do we actually stay in that space and change it from within? And not because I'm coming in as some savior to fix it, but because you're raising local people and helping local people to understand and I guess do that of themselves.
You know, obviously we see that in, I saw it in rural America, but I also see it in rural Australia, where the trend there is that young leave the country to come into the city to get the jobs. Is how do you maintain and sustain your country community and provide them with the necessary, infrastructure, bright lights, the attraction that the cities attract. I mean, it's something that's been going on for eons, isn't it?
It is. And, I did a lot of work in China, not through the not-for-profit, but in the business world. And that was it. Young people would leave their farming communities to come to where the work was, live in massive dormitories. Like I've seen some enormous dormitories they'd live in, send their money back to their family as a way of keeping their family afloat, because the honor of parents was very strong in those environments, which I thoroughly respect. The family unit was strong. The cost to the young people was quite extraordinary. And so, yeah, it's an interesting one, Jeff. Certainly from my limited experience, I think to see the lives of people turned around, to see the help that can be brought to people. There was one occasion where I was with a guy, again, in Sonagachi, and I'm really careful because, again, we ought not to turn this into hero mentality of any form. Leadership comes through serving. Leadership is not about dominating. It's about dominion of serving. And it's how we serve people that actually determines whether we're a leader or not. I think too much of, if I can give a comment, too much of today's leadership is based on what can I get from you? Can I tell you what to do? We've seen that right through the pandemic. We've seen it right through governments around the world. And that's why I think there's such a fracturing of society, because society is saying, whatever happened to public servant? It's kind of this, what happened to the servant part of public servant? So when we went to this particular situation, there was a woman who had appendicitis and would have to have surgery. And if we hadn't kind of got alongside her, because she couldn't work, even though she was in the sex trade, she couldn't work because if she worked, she'd be in too much pain. But by not working, she had no money. So she's kind of stuck. And so I think it's those moments where you just say, you know what, the pure humanity and beauty of humanity says, can I just help you in this moment? Right. And then what I want you to do is, when you're better, move it forward, help somebody else. You don't owe me anything. You don't owe me anything. Just give it forward. Just give it forward. And that to me is servanthood, and that's leadership. And I think that's what the world desperately needs right now. Where are the leaders who serve? And that's a bit of political commentary. Sorry, I'm off on one of my hobby horses, but
no, but it's true. It's true. And it's like silly things now. I've noticed in different shops, a cup of coffee, and they'll put, donate a cup of coffee to the next person that hasn't got, or, like shopping, I've seen little notes, if you can afford, or people donate baskets now. There is more and more. There's not enough, but it's a stepping stone.
Well, I think what we've realized is that the soul of the world is not government. It's people. And I think that the soul, and this is the part that I think we've just got to come alive to. I think government is really passionate to try and be the soul of everything. But it's not. People are the soul of all of this, and so, I agree with the comment that just came up. We do things, Jesus said it's more blessed to give than to receive, but we do things because it's the right thing to do, not because I'm going to get something in return.
No, that's right.
Not because I'm going to set up my future. We do it, because this is part of the soul of a community. And I think the community's soul has been zapped. I don't know what the right word is, almost kind of drawn out. The soul's been drawn out because we've turned it into materialism and consumerism and who can get the biggest and who can go the hardest and who can be famous for 15 minutes. I've said to certainly our church and our charity work, I don't care if you never use my name. I don't care. Like, can't be what this is about. It has to be about the work that we are and the purpose that we are here for. And I think that the soul of the world is in a battle at the moment. And I'm not trying to be catastrophic or histrionic, but the soul of the world is in a battle, and I think we've got to recapture where the soul comes from.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think with all that's been going on the last couple of years, I mean, there's been a lot of highs and there's been a lot of lows, but I think it's brought so many more people together, sharing, talking and caring. And, you've got to look what's brought the best of people out of this, what has helped people. And there's so much more people talking to the neighbours now and acknowledging each other and, talking in the shops. Whereas before, people were so busy in their own little world that, you know, the blinkers were there, but now people are waking up to there's much more going on in this world, and making different choices.
Oh, no question. And I think we saw that, like where I'm coming from in Melbourne, the most locked down city in the world. Like it was only 9 months ago that we were in the worst lockdown, just coming out before Christmas. But, you know, for all of the pain that was in society, and it was enormous. Like I'll share for a moment, if it's okay, about the work that we did during COVID, for example. For all of the pain that was in that, there was a lot of good that happened in those moments. But that good was not, and again, I'm not anti-government. I'm not giving the government credit for what society did. Right? So there's a nuance here between being anti-government and just not giving credit for what we saw our community do. Some extraordinary things, just some purely extraordinary things. You know, about 7 years ago, there's a beautiful river in Beautiful. It's a mud pit, but let's call it beautiful for the purpose of now. The Yarra River in Melbourne. And I was walking along where I live in Warrandyte, and I really felt the Lord speak to me and say, would your community miss your church if it closed? And it's like, of course, you know, we've got music, we've got this, we've got that. And I really felt the Spirit say to me, I'll ask you again, would your community miss you if you closed? And I said, yeah, we've got youth programs, we've got this. And it was like, you know, when as a parent, you're talking to your kids and they give you the wrong answer the first 2 times, you ask it a 3rd time, but you slow it down. So it's like, would your community miss you if you close? And I said, well, obviously the answer is no. And I really felt the Spirit say, I'm giving you 5 years to reposition it so your community would miss you if you close. Because if churches closed, for example, I think communities just go on. Like, So therefore, I kind of go, well, are we really doing what God called us to do if the community would miss us, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
So we went on a journey of building food security. We went on a journey of building disability engagement, which again, I can touch on. How do we include young people with disabilities? How do we create employment opportunities? So we actually really worked hard to understand what actually was going on with our society, what was going on in that space. How do we as a church serve in that space? And so for 5 years, we worked really, really hard. And at the end of 5 years, it was January 2020. And I spoke to the Spirit and I said, okay, ask me again. And it was the same question. And I said, yes, our community would miss us, because we had built a food security program that did the equivalent of 8,000 meals per week.
That's amazing.
Every week. That's 4.5 ton, 1 kilogram equals 1.8 meals. And so it was around about 8,000 meals per week, every single week into our local community. We built that. We built pathways for young people with disabilities. In fact, I've just told our church and community arm that I want 20 young people with disabilities employed by the end of 2023, because I think our environments of community and church should be really safe employment environments for young people with disabilities. We built mental health. We triaged mental health. We trained all of our team in mental health first aid from a spiritual worldview. And that was January 2020. And then our Prime Minister stands up in February 2020 and says, by the way, there's this thing called a pandemic, which I don't think we've ever heard the word pandemic. Certainly, I've never heard the word pandemic in my life. And all of a sudden, the pandemic, it's not an endemic, it's not an epidemic, it's a pandemic. I'm like, what does that even mean? And that was the month after 5 years where I've really felt the Spirit say, I'm going to give you 5 years to position things ready for what I need you to do. And I tell you what, we went to work. Like, we worked hard. And we had, without exaggeration, originally the lockdown was 2 weeks in Australia. They used the term a short, sharp lockdown. I almost have PTSD from that moment of a short, sharp lockdown. Kind of makes me jolt a little bit. But what we went into, and again, without making it political, is the most lockdown city for 2 years. We were in and out of lockdown for 2 years. And again, I don't want it to be a political comment, but the damage that did was extraordinary. Like the mental health issues, the ideation issues. Now, I'm not running commentary on that other than, but what I also saw was neighbours who began to take care of themselves institutions like ours who had positioned for this. And so we did 8,000 meals a week. Now, here's the thing. In that 8,000 meals a week, we would have people queued all the way. We have 7 acres at one of our properties, and we would have people queued all the way out our driveway, up the street. And these people weren't what you would call the normal people, and I use that term carefully, the normal people who need help, right? Because everybody needed help. We had not doctors, pilots who suddenly stopped work, no income. Like, they're not flying anywhere. And they're going, how do I feed my family? I've never been in this position before. I've used up all my savings. How do I? So we had pilots who would be in tears. We had business people, tradespeople. We had people with long-term disabilities who would drive in our driveway just crying. And we would just say, hey, we're here with you. No, we're here. Keep coming back. Keep talking to us. Here's our phone number. Keep ringing us. Every time our blessed Premier stood up and announced, more restrictions or something, our phone would go off the hook. But people just ringing and saying, we just need help. But I saw also a mobilized group of people, and we're not a huge church. We're about 800 to 1,000 people. I saw a mobilized group of people who just went right after it. Like, we literally just went right after it and said, tell us how we can help our community through this moment. And I think that's the ethic of how spiritual things should work. Because spirituality, and in my frame of reference, the things of God, is not a selfish thing. It can't be, otherwise it's no longer genuine. If that makes sense, because if it's about what I can get out of it, it's not genuine. Spirituality, I don't call it something else. But so what we did is we went into feeding people. We went into triaging seniors who had been locked into their homes. We got technology to a whole lot of seniors so that they could connect with their family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm reminded of the words of Martin Luther, who was a great reformer in church history. And Martin Luther once said, during a pandemic, the Black Plague, he said, you know what, I'll do my best to sanitize. I'll do my best. But if my neighbor is in need, I will go to that person. And I actually read that quote to our church and said, this is where we're at. If our neighbor is in need, we go to that person and we do whatever is within our power to help them. And so during that journey, we had people with long-term disabilities, people with mental health challenges, all of this sort of thing. We worked hard in that space, and there's no boast in this. Like, this is not a humble brag where you go, look how good we are. No. We did it because it's part of the ethic of what we believe Christ came to do. It's part of the ethic of what it genuinely means to have a call and a purpose that is greater than myself. So between the not-for-profit sector, I rolled into the leadership in the church and the community sphere, and our community arm is fairly large now, as you see, 8,000 meals a week, 350 to 400,000 meals every year equivalent. Like, it's staggering numbers. And that's all run by a group of people who are motivated by love for their community, by wanting the best for their community. It's motivated by it. And so it's a long answer to the question, but that kind of response in a pandemic is very powerful. And we saw check in on neighbours, young people checking in on old people. Now, my hope, and this is part of the tension of it, my hope is that we learn something from that about what community should look like in the long term. And that now we've turned the tap off of the pandemic, that we don't turn the tap off of what it actually means to be a genuine community.
So when you were doing all these meals, like you say about your church members, were a lot of these volunteers that would come to help all the time? Yeah.
Most of it was done by volunteers, most of it. Now, it's hard to understand on an international level. It's hard to understand the sorts of pressure that we worked under during that time with government. Like, you had to have a permit to travel more than 5 kilometers from your home. Right? Now, we shake our head at that now, but that was our reality. You had to have permission to do certain things. You could be pulled over by the police. And again, I'm not making political comment or health comment, but the pressure of the moment was very, very real. And so we had teams of administrative people working. We had teams of people serving in the practical side. We had teams of people who would triage hundreds and hundreds of phone calls every week to all of the seniors in our world to make sure they had food, because they couldn't go shopping. Because, of course, the fear that had crept in was, if you're an older person, this will kill you. Like, that was the level of fear that we had. And again, not running comment on that other than, you got to make sure that a senior who is of a mindset, if I go outside, I could die. Are they being looked after? How's their mental health? How's their emotional health? How's their psychological well-being? And I think all of those things are spiritual because they're all guided by the same spiritual motivation and driving force. So, yeah, we saw a lot of volunteers stepping in so many different areas. And what I think also helped is it gave people a sense of purpose too in those moments to realize, man, this should be normal. See, I'm a firm believer, Andrena and Jeff, that crisis does two things. It accelerates and it reveals, right? So crisis accelerates what was always going to happen.
Yeah.
So businesses that, and I'm not meaning to be disparaging a business, but a lot of businesses that went under, not all of them, but a lot of them probably could have ended up there anyway, or a lot of problems that happen. It accelerates it. But the other thing is it reveals what's really in the heart of society. So crisis reveals things. And I think the crisis that Melbourne went through over the last 2 years revealed a lot about what sits in our heart. And there's a lot of challenge there, but boy, there's a lot of good stuff too.
Yeah.
And you rules, there's a lot of good stuff that sits within community. And I just hope as I said earlier, I hope that we capture that the soul of society is not government, it's community.
So with all these people coming in for meals and what have you, where were you getting all the food from, to feed that volume of people?
So we've got four providers. So there's a thing in Australia called Food Bank.
Right.
I'm not sure if it's international or not. I apologise about it. But we have Food Bank, Second Bite, Fair Share. And we had a lot of local businesses like local bakeries, local butcher shops who just said, tell us what we can do to contribute to this. So it was really a combination of a large-scale food bank, food security environment. And it was a combination of local community people who said, here we are, give it. And then the other part to it was we had a very strong sense of philanthropic giving within a lot of the business people of our church. And so a lot of our business people just gave. Like we're talking donations of 50 to 100,000 at a time. They just gave because their capacity to give was there. And so I think in that space, it was just the capacity to really think and to mobilize people according to their gift. So, for example, business people, they have a gift of finance. Yeah. And we shouldn't be afraid of talking about money. We should say, that's your gift. So what I want you to do is, this is an opportunity for you to move in your gift. We have people who have a mercy gift. Well, then move in your gift. We have people who have a leadership gift. Will move in your gift. And so I think it's that understanding what your gifting is and then channeling that gifting into the moment. And that's really what we saw happen, Andrena. So a lot of it was philanthropic giving from our church people so we could buy stuff. It was Food Bank, Fair Share, Second Bite, all of these organizations that what they do is if something nearly reaches a use-by date, instead of throwing it out, because the food waste around the world is extraordinary. Like we could fix world poverty almost overnight with food waste.
I agree, definitely.
And there's that old saying that the 7 richest people in our world could fix world hunger overnight.
If they chose.
So the 7 richest people could fix world hunger overnight. But it starts with a philosophical shift. And so I think it's that philosophical shift of don't throw things out, don't go to waste. So what they would do is they would bring it and we would distribute it quickly. And the team worked very, very hard. And I think it's also part of the heart of our church. Again, if you go back to what I said earlier about the disenfranchised, the disempowered and the disabled, part of it just comes out of, as a leader, my responsibility is not to run the program. My responsibility is to ensure that the culture and the setting is right for the people who are gifted in that space to do what they are called to do. I don't need to micromanage it. I need to create a culture. And so my work during the last couple of years and leading up to it was to create a culture and an environment in which this stuff can thrive. So that when it's put to a test, people are ready to go.
Yeah, fabulous. So that would have been run like a military operation. So I know you've got some military background. Would you like to share?
I wouldn't overstate it. But I serve as a chaplain in the Defence Force in Australia. I'm a reservist, so it's part-time. But yeah, I wouldn't overstate the military component, but you certainly have to be organised. Like you can't do it if you're not organised and running things well. So yeah, I've got a bit of there because we do a lot. In Australia at the moment, there is a Royal Commission into veteran suicide, and the well-being of veterans and of soldiers and of people who go into that space, I think is particularly important. And so I have a reserve role. Again, I wouldn't overstate it. It's not like I've got a military history where my father was this and my grandfather was this. It was just something I felt called to do. I just think it was something that I felt was important, was because I'll answer it this way, Andrena. I think often in life we can end up in our own little bubble.
Yeah.
All right. Where everyone believes what I believe. Everyone thinks the way I think. Everyone approaches life with my worldview. So my kids were at the Christian school. I work in a Christian church. My dad was a minister. My father-in-law was a minister. And I think it's really easy to end up in this microcosm that we think is representative of everything. And I'm in this microcosm of everyone agrees with me. Everyone kind of believes what I believe. Everyone sees what I see. And so it's like this kind of weird space. And so why I'm saying that is I felt that it was important for my own learning and my own understanding to put myself in an environment that sat outside my immediate worldview, to stretch my thinking, to create a learning. Because I think the world is a learning environment. And the moment we stop learning, we stop living.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to stop learning. I didn't want everybody to agree with me. I wanted people who would challenge my worldview, challenge what I thought, and at least challenge, can I articulate what I think, if that makes sense? So can I defend what I believe, or have I just grown up with it and therefore that's just the way I understand it? Or is it actually inherently a core part of what I do? And so to me, that space of serving in that arena was as much about the credibility of not being in a bubble. And I encourage everyone listening, we've got to make sure that we don't land in a bubble where we think everybody agrees with us. Because it's a really dangerous place to live.
Definitely.
It's a mentally dangerous place to live. Yeah.
And you've touched on disability, and
Yes.
I know you've had that touch your life. So would you like to share more?
I'm passionate about the space. So our son, Zeke is his name. He has Down syndrome. He is not yet verbal, and I use that term deliberately. When he was born, the moment our son was born, he's our fourth child. We knew straight away, or I knew straight away, because his tongue was sticking out, which is one of the early signs of Down syndrome. And so when Zeke was born, we knew that his name, because the name Zeke means the strength of God, or God will be my strength. And so we didn't know the journey we were in for. Now, our son is not yet verbal, so he turns 18 next month and is a great young man. And what was fascinating to me is our son has never preached in our church. He's never said a word really in our church. But he's taught our church more about the inclusion of God than I think 500 of my sermons every week.
Really?
It's quite extraordinary. He stands on the front door and hugs and welcomes everybody coming in.
Oh, not lovely.
He just is this extraordinary young man. And one of the things that, can I just share a story for a moment about his journey?
Yeah, you feel free.
One of the things that was amazing to me, I'm conscious I'm talking a lot, but I guess that's why I'm here.
Exactly.
But one of the things is, he was in the bath. He would have been 7 or 8 one time, and he was in the bath upstairs, and you have to supervise him because his body wasn't capable. He could fall over, all sorts of things, which you would do with a child anyway. And my daughter called out to us, "Mum, Dad, quick, come." And of course, when you hear that, you're like, uh-oh. So we're running up the stairs at our home. We go bolting in, just as my daughter's standing at the door of the bathroom with this extraordinary smile on her face. And I'm going, well, good. I'm glad you're smiling. Like, when you hear this, "Mum, Dad, come here," you're like, whoa. We get there, and she said, "Watch." And so we saw our son sitting in the bath. I can remember it clear as a bell. And he was looking up at the corner of the room and having a full-on conversation with whatever presence, angelic presence, was in the corner of the room. Now, he talks complete, what we would call gibberish, right? So there's no English frame. There's no cognizance of the language. He was just literally, it was extraordinary, Andrena. He was literally sitting there, and he would stop. He'd listen for a response, then he'd start speaking again. Then he'd stop, he'd listen for a response, and then he'd start laughing and laughing and laughing and laughing. And then he went into this entire season, which he still does, where he will be lying in bed at night talking. And talking conversation, not just babbling like a kid, but talking conversationally in a language that I don't understand. And I was kind of like, I don't know what to make of that. And I really felt the Spirit say to me, I'm not limited by the English language to connect and communicate with people. I can communicate via angels. I can communicate spiritually. Stop projecting your limitations onto your son with a disability. That the only way that you can engage with him, the only way you could possibly engage with him would be if, I don't know, how would you put it? If you speak in English, you say these 5 things, you do these 3 things, you run these rituals. What I really felt God showed me is I'm not limited to connect with people with disabilities. I don't need the English language. There is a spiritual reality here, and I will talk to him in a way that your limitations of your cognizant ability, and I use that genuinely. Like, I think sometimes we think we've got it all together, and a person with a disability doesn't. You know, I can articulate things, and my son's never spoken. Yeah, but he's had an engagement with God that I will never have.
Yeah. And when you were sharing, when you started to say the conversation, I had tingles going up and down my spine then. So I knew what you were going to say. Like Andrew's written a comment, I love Down syndromers, such beautiful hearts.
Yep.
Phil, I own a disability provider company in Brisbane and would be great to connect.
Love to connect with you, Andrew.
Yeah, so we'll sort that out after.
Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely, Andrew. Well done.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, as soon as you said, I thought, gosh, I knew what you were going to say. And that is so beautiful because we, in the past, we've been like, you have to do it this way, but now the world's your oyster and there's so many different opportunities of doing things differently as long as you're coming from your heart.
Yeah. And I think the profundity of how profound it is for young people with disabilities. So we actually have a program in our church of engaging young people with disabilities because their parents can't bring them to church. Like if you've got a young person with autism, how do you do it? Or how do you come into the community space? How do you include? But I think because we have Zeke, it's given me an understanding that perhaps I would have got another way, or perhaps I would have never understood.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. So let me tell this. My father is blind. And went blind quite young. My brother, a number of years ago, was hit by a car and has a brain injury, is in a wheelchair. And my son has Down syndrome, right? And so what people don't understand is I don't regard them according to their ability or disability. They're my family. So when they come to the table, it's not blind dad, it's dad. It's not brain injured Paul, it's Paul. It's not Down syndrome Zeke, it's Zeke.
Yeah.
My way of connecting, so I might have to help my dad do certain things because he can't see, and I might have to help my brother, or I might have to help my son. Like I would have to cut my son's food up because he's not quite dexterous enough to do it. But we've got to get away from this mindset that says we see people through the filter of a temporary moment called Earth, right? and we don't think of things in the scheme of eternity because there is an eternity that transcends this existence. There is a spiritual realm that transcends the existence. And I think we're so limited by the 5 senses that we then regard people that way. Does that make sense? So in other words, it's not my blind dad. He's my dad.
Yeah, yeah.
He's not blind dad. He's dad. Dad, your family, you're at the table. And that's what it means when we talk about inclusion, that we don't see according to the 5 senses or the limitations. We don't see people that way. How do we see them? They're family. We're all one family. Come to the table. Now, the way I interact with you will have a little bit of difference. Like I'll cut his food up or help him, but come to the table. Like, disability is a large part of our world. And so I've spoken at conferences around the world and in Australia on how do we see people who have disabilities. And as I said, we want to employ 20 young people by the end of next year. 20 young people with disability. We have a young lady with not cystic fibrosis. Sorry, it's just gone out of my head. Anyway, with a form of disability, it's just completely gone out of my head. Anyway, I was talking to her dad, and I said, "Mate, tell me about your family." He said, "Oh, I've got my daughter, and this is what she does, and she's been trying to find work everywhere." And I said, "Send her to us. We'll start her with 1 shift a week." Cerebral palsy. There you go. We'll start her with 1 shift a week. And he said, "Why?" I said, "Because I believe that she has a gift that nobody can recognize because they're assessing her on the basis of what they perceive the 5 senses should tell me." Mm. She is working now at the church in meaningful work and here's the thing, and we pay her a full rate. We pay her the full rate of pay. And he said, "Oh, no, because the law in Australia says you can pay someone with a disability 40% or 30% of a normal person's wage." And I was horrified by that. I said, "I'm not doing that. If she does meaningful work, she gets paid full rate." Mm. Mm. You see, because it's all the subtleties too. What we're saying to a person with disability is you're worth 30% of what somebody else is worth. Your work has the value of 50%. But what we're missing is, what does she bring to the table? She brings to the table joy. She brings to the table work. She brings to the table so much more than this limited view of product output. Mm. So I'm passionate about this space because I think God's inclusion of all humanity in his divine plan cannot exclude people groups. It can't exclude them on race. It can't exclude them on gender. It can't exclude them on disability. Because if God's ultimate plan is the inclusion of all humanity, surely I'm meant to do that.
Mm. Yeah.
We had the biggest event in a cathedral on Saturday. 100,000 people turned up at that cathedral. It was called the Grand Final.
The mighty MCG.
Exactly right.
And Final of what?
I call it the cathedral because it's a major religion, isn't it, in Melbourne, in Victoria. Oh. And it had to be the Grand Final. Exactly right.
Oh, God.
But Phil's actually revealing what he's come across. But this one gentleman, his name is Joel Selwood, he touched everybody's hearts in that 100,000 Colosseum Cathedral. But everybody who was watching that TV going live all over the world, that young man touched the hearts of so many people simply by 3 gestures. And one of those gestures was a Down syndrome fellow, and he pulled him out over the actual rail at the finish and brought him down to be part of the whole fraternity because he'd been the water boy for 7 years at the Geelong Club.
Yep.
And then I changed over after 6 o'clock to watch it on another station there. And the next thing, the actual Channel 7 commentator, he left the podium and said, "I'm going into the mosh pit to get that water boy." And they brought the water boy back up to be interviewed. And the heart that this young fella had for Joel was just immense. And I said, he did 3 things. That was one of them. It was just amazing. The second one is he took one of the legends of the Geelong Football Club, a guy called Gary Ablett, whose son has a very precocious illness. And he grabbed him and took him onto the field to go through the banner to say, this is something that you can highlight in your life. And the other turning point was in receiving the actual grand final medal, when he stepped up and the young guy from the Auskick came to give him the medal and put it around his head and he put the cap on it. But he actually gave him his football boots and then he turned the guy around and said, look into the camera and then wave. That guy has built a community spirit in Geelong, in the city of Geelong. And I reckon everybody who's watching it felt it in their heart that they could do the same thing that Joel did. And I have to say, when I was watching that, I had a tear in that. I actually thought he was very similar, the male version of Princess Di, when she was, her funeral concert went down and everybody's throwing flowers onto it. That guy, he's just a living, bloody, amazing gentleman. He's just a humanitarian. It was just so touching. Yeah.
Oh, it was beautiful. I know the point you're talking, because the young guy with Down syndrome is part of their management team who does, again, the water boy and the towels and all that sort of stuff, but they treated him as an equal. So when they got him over the fence, they said, come on the ground. You should see the look on his face. It was like, I get to run on the ground. And one of the players put his premiership medal around his neck and let him have a run, because what they were saying is, you are included.
Yeah.
This is your victory. This is not just our victory. It's your victory. It was a really profound moment. You're right, Jeff.
Mm.
And it's in front of the public, as opposed to something that's unseen. So, you know, the gestures that you've done may be unseen, but except for the family members and those members of your church and your faculty. But Joel was really the minister of the day.
Yeah, it was brilliant. It's brilliant.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Wow. Well, we're not running out of time, but we're coming near the end of time, if you like, of the show. So is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners today? In any other stories or any words of comfort, and I can see a little Robin looking at me on the fence here, and his little head's going up and down. So is there anything you'd like to finish up on?
Yeah, I just think perhaps an encouragement of one more story, if I can. Our youngest son, Judah, when he was very young, contracted an infection that landed him in hospital. And I basically rushed him into hospital, and it was one of those scenes out of a movie. He was only 3 months old. One of those scenes out of a movie, but all of a sudden, doctors working everywhere and tubes, and it was a very confronting thing. And I felt myself kind of pinned up against the wall, watching almost this out of body experience, watching my son in this extraordinarily traumatic moment. It was something that's very hard to actually describe. And he went through, we were called and told he just needed a little operation, which, you know, fixed, but it caused a sepsis within his system, like a blood infection. We were told probably 4 times over that journey that he would not live, that he would likely die. And I would remember getting calls to come in at night time to say goodbye and all this sort of stuff. But one of the things that was really important is that as a 3-month-old, I got one of the old iPods. And I put some music into it, because the external environment was bells and whistles and machines, and I didn't want that getting into his spirit. I didn't want that being what was feeding him, as it were. And so one of the things that we did is we actually got these tiny little headphones and put them on him while he was lying. And again, without getting too graphic about it, basically he had his stomach hanging in a bag, and, you know, it was extraordinary. And we had the music, and I think the thing that I was impressing upon him, and I would encourage everyone, it's about how we control and manage what actually gets into our head. What do we allow in? Because often we find ourselves in these circumstances where it's just noise, and so much noise, the noise of government, or the noise of this, or the noise of that. And at the end of his journey, I knew at one point the Spirit said to my wife and I, we'd been called into a side room to basically be told he won't live. That's a very traumatic moment. And for anyone that has been through that, my heart is with you in that. Like, that's a very, very traumatic, challenging thing. And we were called in, and I actually stopped the doctor at one point, the surgeon. I said, I need you to stop, Doc. And he looked at me. I said, I just need you to stop, because there was so much powerful negativity coming across. Right, there was so much verbalization of stuff that it wasn't just me. I couldn't handle it. I didn't think it was producing life, because I think there's power in the words that we speak, right?
Oh, definitely.
Now, we either speak life or we speak death. Every word we speak is either life or death. And I just found these words were just like little packets of death coming across the couch at us. So I stopped him, and I turned to my wife, and my wife said to me, he'll live. And I said, yeah, I know. I felt the Spirit speak to me, and spoke to both of us and said he'll live. But one of the things was, at the end of his last surgery, he had 9 surgeries, in hospital for 3 months, intensive care for a long time, all that sort of stuff. But at the end of it, I said to the surgeon, who's the #1 crisis surgeon in the country, I didn't know that at the time. And I said to him, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being minor procedure, 10 being there must be a divine intervention for our son to be alive. I said, I want you to tell me, where is it? And he goes, it's 8. He said, but if I'm being truthful, it's 10. There must be some form of divine intervention. There must be something more that intervened in this moment. He said, because from our perspective, we do not understand why your son is alive. Now, I know that's not everybody's journey. We do lose people. I understand that. I've lost very close friends to me. But the purpose of sharing that story as an encouragement to people is surround yourself and feed on the things that brings a spirit of life, that bring a spirit of encouragement. And we've just got to always be aware of what messages am I letting get into my head and into my heart, and what am I allowing to get in? And I really felt for our son, we had to, because he couldn't do it, we had to protect him from all of the machines and all of the comments and all of the tears. We had to protect him. And to this day, he is an extraordinary he's 13, he's an extraordinary musician, has a love for music, and I think it was part of that protective that built something within him. It is one of the most positive, encouraging kids you could ever meet. So I want to encourage, if you're going through a tough time, you know, there's that old saying, if you're going through hell, don't stop.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We have moments where we go through hell on earth. And if anyone's listening or watching and you're going through a hard time, can I encourage you? And I'm not being flippant with the pain. I'm not being dismissive of the challenge. I'm not being anything other than, let me encourage you, feed on the stuff that's going to build you. Feed on the stuff that's going to speak life, because there's so much life and death in the way we speak. So feed on the stuff that's going to be life. And, you know, I think it can help. So my encouragement to everyone is, as a community, you are the soul, not government. You are the soul of your community. You are the soul of your world. You are the ones who speak life. And the way we speak life is, what do we build up that's coming in? So can I just encourage everybody and finish on this thought? Know what you're feeding on. Know what is nourishing your spiritual walk. Know what is nourishing your soul, and guard it. Like, guard it fiercely. Fiercely guard that subconscious perspective, because it's out of the subconscious that we speak. Jesus said, out of the heart, the mouth speaks. And it's out of that place within us that we speak. So I want to encourage everyone, you know, get around people that build you. Get around people that encourage you, like this. Like, this is an encouragement for people. And guard your heart above all else. Proverbs says, above all else, guard your heart, because out of it flow the issues of life. So we've got to guard it. So that would be my last bit of, I guess, philosophical, theological encouragement, Andrena.
Oh, whew. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, well, I don't know what to say here in a minute. I got to compose myself. Profound words and wisdom, and it's been an absolute delight for you to share. And keep on doing what you're doing. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, it's such an honor to talk with both of you and with your audience. And, you know, the greatest amongst you is the servant of all. So I'm pleased to be able to, in a small way, serve and encourage all of you. So bless you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a few comments that's coming up. I'll just grab them.
Oh yeah, read them out, please.
Andrew, meaningful show. Wish Phil and his community goals bear fruit. Marlene, beautifully said. And Rhonda says, thank you very much. Yeah. And that's exactly right, mate. You know. All right. Thank you, Phil.